Hello, it's Wednesday, May 31st, 2017. You are listening to Inception Radio Network, voice of the fringe majority. This is Carol Carl with UFO-headline news. How far away is Deneb? Deneb, that star, that amazing thing up there shining in the sky? Well, we can see it tonight. And here's some more info from the folks at earthsky.org. Deneb is part of that beautiful summer triangle asterism, and it's just about to come back into convenient evening view for another season. No, an asterism, this broadcaster learned, is not a constellation. It's just a recognizable group of stars. This one is made of 3 bright stars in 3 different constellations. There's the star Deneb, one of the 3 summer triangle stars. When you gaze at Deneb, you're gazing across a great distance of space. The exact distance to Deneb is not known for certain, but it's currently accepted that that distance is around 2,000 light years. That makes Deneb one of the most distant stars we can see with the eye alone. Why don't astronomers know the distance to Deneb exactly? In fact, there are varying estimates for the star's distance, and the answer to why they don't know is a glimpse into the process of science itself and the way the different astronomers or teams of astronomers using advancing technologies try to improve on what was learned earlier, sometimes years before. It seems the estimates for Deneb's distance have been obtained by a variety of methods, some of which involved theoretical models related to the way stars evolve, and some of which assumed Deneb's membership in the Cygnus 0b7 Association of Stars. Wonder what those membership dues run. The most important modern distant measurement for Deneb came in the 1990s with the European Space Agency's Earth-orbiting Hipparcos space astrometry mission. We'll spell Hipparcos, that's Hipparcos. Hipparcos gathered astrometric data on Deneb. Early analyses of that data indicated a distance of somewhere around 2,000 light years. Since then, various groups of astronomers have reanalyzed that Hipparcos data. Considering that computer power gets stronger with each passing year, that helps improve techniques for these analyses. So, for example, a 2009 study published in the peer-reviewed journal Astronomy and Astrophysics used a newer method of analysis, which resulted in a distance for Deneb that's barely half the widely accepted value. Why does Deneb's distance matter? It matters to astronomers because if they don't know exactly how far away a star is, they can't get accurate numbers of its true size, mass, and energy output. The European Space Agency now has a second astrometric satellite. It's called Gaia, Gaia. She orbits around the Earth. Her goal is to measure the positions and distances of stars with more precision than ever before, and it's in the process of constructing what the European Space Agency says will be, quote, the largest and most precise 3D space catalog ever made, end quotes. A new estimate for Deneb's distance wasn't included in Gaia's first data release in September of 2016. Maybe a new distance estimate for Deneb will be included in Gaia's second data release. That's planned for April 2018. And so science marches on. Here's the bottom line. Deneb is a large and very hot supergiant star, part of the famous Summer Triangle, and one of the most distant stars you can see with your eye alone. Sweet. And, gentle listeners, you can expect to find the usual charts and graphs accompanying this article by heading on over to ufo-headline-news.com. Speaking of things in sky and space, here's a headline from Dave Mosier from the Space Division of Business Insider. NASA has noticed a puzzling change in Saturn's Hexagon, that weather system the size of 2 Earths. A giant hexagon is swirling at Saturn's North Pole, and scientists don't fully understand it, despite years of observation by NASA's Cassini spacecraft. That hexagon, a jet stream that traps an entire polar weather system, is as wide as 2 planet Earths. It's so big, in fact, that small vortices inside of it are often twice as wide as the largest hurricanes on planet Earth. And this week, NASA released new images and animations of the Hexagon. The photos show the giant weather system changed from turquoise to a ruddy yellow in just a few years' time, although the 1,800-mile-wide central vortex, about the length of the entire United States East Coast, has kept a rich blue color. There's animation you can find later at ufo-headline-news.com. Check it out. The change in color is dramatic, and while NASA isn't sure why it happened, researchers think the shift has to do with the gas giant's changing seasons. Saturn reached its northern solstice, or its longest day of the planet's summer season, May 24th this year. Shortly after Cassini snapped the set of photos that you can see later, the shift has gradually increased the amount of ultraviolet light reaching the planet's north pole. That's where the hexagon is located. And this has created hazy yellow smog. By that logic, the vortex might still be blue because the sunlight touches that area last. It might also have kept its color if, like hurricanes on Earth, it constantly yanks air downward, thus pushing any smog deep below the cloud tops. While Cassini's been studying Saturn for about 13 years, the planet's full orbit around the Sun takes 29.5 years, so the probe still hasn't observed all of Saturn's seasons. Space scientists followed clouds in the giant storm. They calculated wind speeds and found that the innermost rings of the storm blow at a shocking 340 miles per hour. By contrast, winds inside Hurricane Allen in 1980, the strongest ever recorded on Earth, well, those winds topped out at 190 miles per hour. Unfortunately, Earth won't be able to enjoy any of these views for much longer. The Cassini spacecraft is running low on propellant, and NASA doesn't want it to accidentally crash into one of Saturn's icy moons. That could cause contamination to the vast subsurface oceans that at least 2 of those moons contain. So, on September 15th, 2017, the $3.26 billion mission will take a plunge into Saturn, break apart, and become one with the giant ball of hydrogen and helium. Almost poetic. Cassini's final moments in a great blaze of glory. And here at Inception Radio Network, UFO Headline News, we will do our best to keep you posted on all the events in the run-up to that moment. We're doing some run-up to the moment of Wayback Wednesday, Part 2, Close Encounters of the Manitoba Kind. But first, there's other news. This broadcaster is very well aware of the ancient, long-time admonition that the reporter, shall we say, should not become part of the story. But in this case, it's hard not to, and we are compelled, so it goes something like this. Last Saturday night, this broadcaster, as is her habit, was listening to Inception Radio Network to Alan B. Smith's rather new show called Paranormal Now. It's extraordinary. If you haven't heard it, you should. It's Saturday nights at Inception Radio Network. And last Saturday night, Alan B. Smith's guest for Paranormal Now, well, he had 2 guests. His first guest was none other than Peter Robbins, the author of, among many books, Left at Eastgate, which is a chronicle of the Rendlesham Forest Bentwaters affair, co-written with Larry Warren. Remember that name. It is pivotal. As we listened to this, we realized, oh, there's breaking news here. There's going to be a big reveal. Whatever could it be? We stayed tuned and we found out. And as we listened, we thought, oh, this is going to trigger a lot of fallout. Stay tuned. And we did. So here is that fallout. It comes by way of an article posted in the mirror.com.uk. A UFO expert has become embroiled in a bitter feud with his co-author and one-time friend after accusing him of, quote, deceiving, end quotes, him with his, quote, false, end quotes, account of the infamous Rendlesham Forest incident. Peter Robbins and Larry Warren co-authored Left at Eastgate, a first-hand account of the Bentwater Woodbridge UFO incident, its cover-up, and investigation, that's the whole title, 30 years ago. But they're now at loggerheads. United States researcher Peter Robbins sparked the row when he accused Warren, a former member of the United States Air Force Security Police who now lives in Liverpool, of deceiving him. This accusation was made during a radio interview. Larry Warren, in turn, blasted Nick Pope, former head of the British government's UFO desk, for siding with Peter Robbins. He hit back Nick Pope on Facebook for branding him a liar. Yes, Larry Warren's online rant is still available for your perusal. American Larry Warren claims he witnessed a UFO land near RAF Bentwaters, Suffolk, while stationed there with the United States Air Force in December of 1980. Here's a quote from Peter Robbins. "The encompassed picture is the subjective account of my co-author, Larry Warren's, story of the events that he was involved in, the events surrounding him, things that don't directly relate to the story, but to his life, were not only not accurate, but that they were not true. Having worked with him for decades, having spent several intense years at the beginning, we're talking 30 years ago next month when we first shook hands, that I would assist him in writing this book. I have a long history with Larry Warren, and I felt that after doing the research that he was absolutely good on his word," end quotes. In fact, this broadcaster had a very cogent part of that conversation on the air during Paranormal Now. It went something like, without any apparent provocation, Larry Warren offered this to Peter Robbins: "If you find something in my work, in my accounts, that you want to challenge, bring it, and we'll talk about it." Well, apparently it didn't quite work out like that. Back to the article, Nick Pope, who ran the Ministry of Defense's Secretariat, or Air Staff 2A, that was dubbed the UFO desk. They investigated military sightings. They were closed in 2009, budget reasons, and Nick Pope is backing Peter Robbins' claims. In a post to his 4,980 friends and his 13,852 followers on Facebook, Nick Pope praised Robbins for, quote, "having the courage and integrity to make what was clearly a difficult and painful admission that he'd been taken in by Larry Warren's lies," end quotes. Nick Pope ended his post by saying, quote, "The verdict from the wider UFO community is clear. The Larry Warren story is officially dead," end quotes. Then Larry Warren, of course, slammed the ex-Ministry of Defense man, who now lives in Tucson, Arizona, for, quote, "whoring himself out." That was a 20-minute Facebook rant, during part of which Warren challenged Nick Pope to take it on, saying, quote, "You can have it if you can take it from me. I'll even bring the gift box. You seem to want it because I don't deserve it." Then Larry Warren continues, "You stuck your nose into Rendlesham years ago to the point some morons out there think you were working the MOD desk when it happened. I think you were being beat up on the schoolyard at that time, so that's impossible, but you don't stop that myth." He ends his video by saying, "The book is my story, 100%. I've done stuff that you could never do, and seen things you'll never see, and I'll still be standing tall when you go cock-a-doodle-doo. You were never in the military. You are a tie somewhere," end quotes. The rant goes on. Yup, it's ugly, but not unexpectedly so. If you want to check out the rest of this article, gentle listeners, you can find links later at ufo-headline-news. Oh, the second guest that night on Alan B. Smith's Paranormal Show on Inception Radio Network was none other than the founder and president of Epic Voyages, Ken Cherry, an author on his own. If you haven't read Mark Slade Investigates the Stephenville Lights, oh, get your hands on a copy. Ken Cherry wrote a good read. Well, what do you know? It's Way Back Wednesday. Plenty of space available on that shuttle that takes us way back. And from the Winnipeg Free Press, let's continue. It's Close Encounter of the Manitoba Kind, Part 2. In Part 1, we introduced you to Stephen McCulloch. He was out looking for signs of gold and silver in the rocks that embedded in the Precambrian Shield in a place called Whiteshell Provincial Park in Manitoba in Canada. Shortly after he'd eaten his lunch at the site, Stephen McCulloch saw what he just didn't expect at all. It was a craft. He heard what seemed to be human voices, one a higher pitch, one lower. Stephen McCulloch was definitely an adventurous soul. He actually stuck his head into the opening of this saucer-shaped craft, saw a maze of lights, and at one point a jet of something hot shot from the craft and burned Stephen McCulloch on his chest. Very curious burn marks, dime-sized in a grid pattern. They were severe. They were almost what would appear to be burns of a radioactive kind. Fast forward. From May 20th, 1967, at about 12:15 p.m., the time of the initial event. This broke big. It caught the attention of media and population alike. And, as it was said, quote, it really became part of the history of the community, end quotes. So, now here's where we left off last Wednesday. On June 29, 1967, a rookie Manitoba MP stood up in the House of Commons and asked a question about UFO invasions and the McCulloch case. Quote, I had felt obliged to ask a question. It had happened in my writing, end quotes, said former Governor-General and Premier Ed Schreier. He was then an NDP member of Parliament. Quote, plus, I was intrigued that someone seemingly so genuine was convinced he had seen something inexplicable. So I asked the question, and the question was taken not by one of the ministers, but by the Prime Minister himself. And what did Lester Pearson do? He took it as notice, end quotes. A few days later, Lester Pearson, the Prime Minister himself, offered McCulloch a chance to look through the government's file on the matter. But Schreier refused. He said, quote, I didn't take it because it required an understanding that you had to keep the contents confidential. I thought that would put me in a problematic position. I just wanted to make sure there was no danger to the individual, to his family, and to the country. I was reassured there was no significant danger, and it was left somewhat as an open question, end quotes. A few months later, Defense Minister Leo Cadieux was quoted in Hansard as saying, quote, it is not the intention of the Department of National Defense to make public the report of the alleged sighting, end quotes. And although Defense Minister Leo Cadieux had never met Stephen McCulloch in person, speaking to him at the time on the phone, he said he hopes to visit the site this summer and with his grandchildren, now that he knows they can get there on horseback. Having made a point of trying to find out more information at the time, Schreier wants to see this site with his own eyes. Now, standing on the flat rock that his father described as the one the UFO landed on, son Stan McCulloch was surprised at how accurate his father's hand-drawn map, drawn from memory in the days after the incident, really was. While he expected to see the flat rock, he didn't know it was slightly sloped. Quote, it still baffles me, the slant we're on, but then I remember how he described the object, quotes. And he continued, quote, now I know it probably tilted because it was coming up from a slope. And again, Stan wondered, what the hell was he doing here? He continued, quote, there's nothing for him here. The geology stakes and the looking for precious minerals? I sure as hell wouldn't want to spend time here. But he was here. I know that now, end quotes. And he has a theory about why his dad and many others around the world have reported so many UFOs in the post-Second World War years. Quote, when we blew up the first nuclear bomb and we sent our first radio signals, we got attention. Maybe it was, quote, what are they doing on that planet? Oh, they're killing each other. Let's check back in a few hundred years, end quotes. When Steve McCulloch died on October 28, 1999, at the age of 83, there was no mention in his obituary of the Falcon Lake incident, only how his, quote, passion for this vast new country developed into a love of nature, open spaces, animals, and birds, and a celebration of what Canada's unending wilderness had to offer, end quotes, and that, quote, geology became one of his hobbies, and the reason for many trips to the wilderness to see the world in a grain of sand, end quotes. Cryptic, but it is in there between the lines. For a man whose hobby of prospecting had given him such joy, the Falcon Lake incident also seemed to mark the end of his amateur prospecting career, said his son. Quote, when he died, we found several wooden boxes of rocks in the basement. I only kept 1 or 2 samples. The rest went into the garden. There are about 1,200 reported UFO sightings every year across Canada. About 3 to 5% can't be explained away. Expert UFO researcher and author Chris Rutkowski, yep, there's a book, said he not only has copies of the hundreds of documents produced by the authorities, he also has in his possession a piece of that melted radioactive metal that Stefan McCulloch found at the site on that amazing day. Quote, he says, "If I'd made it up, I would have gone to town with details, but he only said what he saw. He didn't care if anyone believed him or not. As far as what Stefan McCulloch encountered, I have no idea, but it's a riveting story," closes Rutkowski, end quotes. 5 decades on, whatever happened at Falcon Lake is still of interest to UFO enthusiasts and regular folks, too. Local resident Bob Firth has no doubt that McCulloch saw what he reported that day. Firth works at the Falcon Lake Golf Course, and he says he may have seen one of those 2 objects. Quote, "I was 14 at the time. It is such a weird story," end quotes. Bob Firth said he and 3 friends were at the beach on the south side of Falcon Lake when they saw something on the other side, north of the lake. That something was moving westward. Quote, "It was little. If you hold your thumb up, it would be that big. The thing just jumped across the sky. We said, 'What is that?' And I said, 'It's a bird, it's a plane, it's a flying saucer.' And then I didn't think anything more about it," end quotes. But later that weekend, Bob Firth and his family were in Winnipeg to see the Victoria Day fireworks. Someone ran up to them and started talking about the Falcon Lake sighting. That's when Bob Firth realized he might have seen the same thing. Quote, "I was later interviewed by someone from the University of Manitoba. In my mind, I can still see it. Something crossed the sky and disappeared," end quotes. Exciting times. Barb Hamilton didn't see the UFO, but that didn't stop her and other local kids from getting caught up in all the excitement. She says, quote, "I was 12 at the time, and for young kids, after what happened, it started everybody wondering. We kids got together and formed a little club for UFOs," end quotes. "And they thought they were hot on the trail when one of them heard a beeping sound from the forest." Quote, "We were all convinced this was something. We called all the kids together and went off in that direction, in the direction of the beeping sound. We couldn't find it, but it came flying back and just screamed." Hamilton said her dad suggested they speak with a wildlife expert, and after they did, and she heard the sound of the saw-whet owl, well, quote, "Its mating call sounds like a machine," end quote, she said, but quickly added she does not doubt Stefan McCulloch's story. She said, quote, "I don't think Stefan was making it up. I think he saw something I can't explain," end quotes. Falcon Beach ranch owner Devin Imrie offers trail rides to the site for people who make reservations in advance. Oh, is that not cool? And recently the ranch hosted a 50th anniversary commemorative event with escorted trail rides to the site. May 20th, 1967, Canada's Roswell, a close encounter of the Manitoba kind. We hope you've enjoyed that. There's lots more out there concerning this event, lots of minutiae and extremely interesting details. But now we hear horses approaching in the distance. It's time for us to mount and hit the trail, because that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Inception Radio Network. Follow today's broadcast at ufo-headline-news.com. Take care of each other. We're all in this together. This is Carol Carl. See you tomorrow.